My name is Emily Chen. I've worked as a financial analyst at a pharmaceutical company in Boston for almost 5 years. Most days pass in quiet number spreadsheets and coffee runs. But on that Tuesday, everything shifted the moment I sat down with my lunch. I had just peeled the wrapper off my turkey sandwich when I looked up and saw them two people in dark suits standing at my desk through the break room window, clipboard in hand, gloves on, moving papers and opening drawers like they had every right to be there. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was clarity. The kind that clicks into place when you've known something was coming for a while. I didn't move, just watched from behind the glass as one of them pointed to my computer screen and the other pulled open the bottom file drawer. Every motion was measured, professional, cold. My stomach tightened not because I didn't know what this was about, but because I did. Someone had finally pulled the trigger. I stood slowly, sandwich forgotten on the table. There was no announcement, no warning. No one had told me an inspection was scheduled, which meant this wasn't random. This was strategic. I took one last breath and walked out of the break room. As I stepped closer, I could see Madison Grant hovering nearby. She wasn't even pretending not to watch. Just standing by the copier with a stack of untouched reports, eyes locked on the scene like it was opening night on Broadway. The two compliance officers didn't flinch when I arrived. The taller one glanced up and nodded, his expression unreadable. The other kept scanning a document, making notes without acknowledging me. I kept my voice calm. I asked if I could help them. He responded that this was a routine inspection, but we both knew better. There was nothing routine about rifling through someone's desk during their lunch break. Nothing standard about choosing to show up when they thought I'd be out of the way. As the conversation unfolded, I realized how carefully this had been orchestrated. The report triggering the inspection had been submitted anonymously. But everything about the timing, the tone, the silence told me whose fingerprints were on it. Madison had been laying the groundwork for this for months. She had tracked every break I took. Every word I typed, every second I stepped away from my desk. And now, she was watching the culmination of it all play out like a finale she wrote herself. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been watching too. Just not the way she had. Not through suspicion or spreadsheets of fabricated flaws. I had been paying attention in my own way, quietly, without fanfare, without the need to prove anyone wrong. And while she had built a case, I had built something else. Something I never expected would matter, until that moment. Madison Grant joined our team about 6 months after I did. She came from a private equity background, carried herself like she'd just stepped off a leadership panel, and always made sure everyone knew exactly how many hours she worked and how few mistakes she made. On paper, she was impressive. Sharp resume, polished demeanor, articulate in meetings. But there was something underneath that polish that felt sharp in a different way. Like everything she said had a second edge to it. It started small. The first few weeks, she'd peek over during my client calls and offer suggestions I hadn't asked for. At first, I chalked it up to eagerness. Maybe she was trying to help, but her corrections weren't necessary. They weren't even helpful. She'd interrupt mid-call to rephrase something I had already explained perfectly. Then she started copying our supervisor on email, where she pointed out formatting choices in my reports that didn't need correcting. She framed it as collaboration, but it always felt like surveillance wrapped in courtesy. She volunteered for projects I had already been assigned, not to support, but to reshape. To adjust things, just enough to insert herself, and then suggest improvements that added nothing of value. She'd circle back later and subtly imply that her input saved the deliverable. I started noticing her presence in spaces she didn't belong, walking past my desk right after I submitted a file, hovering by the printer when I was retrieving confidential reports. Her timing was always too perfect to be a coincidence. Madison never confronted anything directly. That wasn't her style. She chipped away, quietly, persistently. I'd find my calendar reorganized after she casually suggested a better structure for my meetings. She'd mentioned in group huddles that some people weren't using the latest spreadsheet template, glancing in my direction without using my name. She'd ask me how long my lunch break was, framed like a joke, but her eyes watched the clock when I walked away. Every moment she could track became data. Every small deviation became evidence. At first, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my work, stayed professional, and kept my head down. But the atmosphere around her felt like walking past an air vent, blowing just a few degrees too cold. Subtle enough that you could brush it off, but over time, it started to chill. My coworkers began acting differently too. Some didn't notice anything, but others grew distant, unsure of where to stand. Madison had a way of making you question your footing without ever touching you. I kept asking myself why. What was it about me that triggered her? I didn't brag. I didn't compete. I met deadlines and hit targets, but I didn't make a show of it. And that, I realized, was the problem. She couldn't measure me the way she measured herself. I didn't give her metrics she could beat. No visible scoreboard. No public applause. I was quiet in my wins, and that made me unpredictable. Threatening even. Because you can't outshine someone who doesn't need the spotlight. Over time, her actions grew more methodical. She began documenting things. I could tell. There were too many moments where she'd reference emails from weeks ago or note exact times I logged into systems. I once caught a glimpse of her computer when I passed by an open file labeled Emily Chen Performance Tracking. I didn't say anything, not then, because part of me wanted to know how far she would take it, and because part of me already knew where this path was leading. Madison wasn't just ambitious. She needed me to fall so she could rise, and I had a feeling she was almost ready to make her move. Once I understood Madison's game, I stopped playing defense. She wanted to catch me slipping. So I gave her just enough to hold on to. Small mistakes, harmless inconsistencies, the kind of things that wouldn't raise red flags on their own but would look suspicious when strung together by someone desperate to prove a point. I didn't do it out of pettiness. I did it with precision, like laying breadcrumbs for someone already convinced they'd found the path. I'd send an internal report with the wrong attachment, then follow up an hour later with the correct one. I'd mark a file as submitted on Tuesday when it was clearly finalized on Wednesday. A few subject lines went out with a lowercase letter where there should have been a capital, nothing that would cost us a client or slow a project, just enough to be noticed by someone watching me that closely. It was a strange feeling engineering flaws in a system I took pride in keeping flawless. But the deeper she watched, the clearer her obsession became. I needed the contrast to be undeniable. What surprised me most was how quickly she took the bait. She didn't question the context. She didn't ask for clarification. She just documented. Each email she flagged, every spreadsheet she screenshotted, every file she printed out, all tucked away like trophies. I could practically see her confidence growing. She thought she was winning. She thought I was unraveling. But every note she added to her private dossier was a reflection of her focus, not mine. This wasn't about proving her wrong. It was about revealing how far she was willing to go to prove herself right. By the time she had a full folder labeled with my name, it was already telling the story I wanted it to tell. Not that I was careless, but that she was compulsive. That she needed my mistakes more than I ever needed my successes. She built her case, and I built my mirror. The moment she decided to present it, I knew exactly what would happen next. Because this wasn't just about catching me. It was about exposing who had been watching and why. Madison didn't rush. She moved like someone who believed patience was power. Over the course of weeks, she compiled screenshots of corrected reports, forwarded emails where I had sent minor updates, and printed out notes that painted a picture of inconsistency. She took each small deviation and layered it with implication. A date adjusted became a missed deadline. A follow-up correction turned into a sign of confusion. It was all technically true, but none of it was honest. She crafted her documentation like a legal brief, precise, selective, and heavy with suggestion. Her language was clinical, but loaded. Systematic errors, repeated oversights, patterns of concern. She never called me careless outright. She didn't need to. Her file did the talking. The way she organized it, the way she referenced incidents by date and department, gave the illusion of something bigger, something urgent, and slowly people started to believe it. I began to feel it before anyone said it. The change in tone, the way some coworkers hesitated before asking me for help, the way conversations quieted when I walked into a room. No one accused me of anything directly, but doubt doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a whisper passed between enough ears. Madison knew exactly how to build that echo. She dropped just enough concern in the right places, phrased as questions, framed as observations. Always careful, always plausible. By the time she approached HR, she had already prepped the battlefield. The compliance team was looped in under the guise of a routine review, but I knew what this was. She had curated a case meant to unravel everything I'd built. Her reports landed like accusations without ever using the word guilty. And the scariest part was how easy it would be to believe her. Because if you weren't looking too closely, it all looked like the truth. I wasn't just preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing to be erased one bullet point at a time. I started keeping the Daily Light log about 1.5 years ago. It wasn't anything formal or structured, just a plain notebook I picked up from a bookstore on impulse. I'd heard a podcast talk about how writing down 3 good things at the end of each workday could help shift perspective, especially in high-stress environments. So I gave it a try. It felt simple, honest, something I could control when so much of the work felt reactive and unpredictable. Most days, the entries were small. A kind comment from a coworker, a client who expressed genuine appreciation, a team member who stayed late to double-check numbers without being asked. Nothing grand or dramatic, just moments that reminded me why I cared about the work. I never shared the journal with anyone. It sat in the second drawer of my desk next to spare pens and a pack of sticky notes. Quiet, undisturbed, just for me. Over time, it became a habit, as steady as my morning coffee. No matter how hard the day was or how much pressure I felt, I made time to write those 3 things. Some days, it was hard to find them, but forcing myself to look shifted something in me. It slowed the spiral. It reminded me that people around me were trying, that kindness didn't always wear a spotlight, and that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes felt. What I didn't realize then was how much I was documenting more than my mood. The log became a kind of unintentional map of our office. Patterns emerged. Certain names came up again and again, coworkers who consistently helped other supervisors, who gave fair feedback, and assistants who went out of their way to support. I saw who built, who lifted, and who brought light. The details weren't grand, but they were consistent. They painted a picture of the character behind the role. At the time, I wasn't thinking strategically. I wasn't preparing a case or protecting myself. I was just trying to stay grounded in a workplace that often felt overwhelming. I didn't notice who wasn't in the journal. I wasn't looking for absence. I was looking for warmth. But that absence became louder with every page I filled. And though I didn't write with her in mind, one name never made its way into a single line. Not once. Not in over 18 months. And that I would later realize said more than any complaint ever could. The journal wasn't hidden. It sat where it always had, tucked neatly in my drawer beside a stack of files and a box of paperclips. One of the compliance officers found it while checking for unapproved storage devices. He pulled it out and flipped through the pages without much thought. Then he paused. He turned a few more, slower this time. The other officer stepped closer. They exchanged a glance. A silent, subtle shift passed between them. One I couldn't read, but I felt it change the air around us. He asked what it was. I told him it was just something I wrote at the end of each day. Personal notes. A practice in gratitude. I expected him to hand it back. But instead, they asked if they could review it more thoroughly. I nodded. There was no reason to object. It wasn't a record I had kept for defense. It wasn't a case file. Just a quiet record of appreciation I never thought would mean anything beyond myself. They sat down at my desk, flipping page after page. The room around us kept moving, but their focus didn't waver. Colleagues started to notice. Conversation slowed. People glanced toward my cubicle with narrowed eyes. It was like time had folded around that small leather book. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No one spoke. One officer leaned over to whisper something to the other. I couldn't hear it. I didn't need to. Whatever they were seeing, it had changed the story. Finally, one of them looked up and asked me how long I had been keeping the journal. I told him. 18 months. He asked if the entries were real. I answered yes. They nodded, and turned to where Madison stood, arms crossed, trying to appear unaffected. They asked her to step into a conference room. She didn't argue, but her shoulders tensed in a way I hadn't seen before. That was the first crack. When the officers returned, they didn't bring my journal back right away. They opened it to a marked page. They showed me the list they had compiled, 67 names mentioned in entries across nearly 2 years. Coworkers, managers, assistants, even the security guard downstairs. But not Madison, not once. Her absence didn't need explanation. It echoed louder than any entry could. One officer said softly that sometimes what's missing says more than what's written. That moment shifted everything. Not because I had outsmarted her, but because I hadn't even tried to. The truth had revealed itself without effort, without intention. The quiet record of kindness that had kept me afloat had become something far more powerful. It was a mirror, one she had never expected to stand in front of. And when she did, it showed everything she tried to hide. The shift didn't happen all at once, but it was noticeable. A quiet current of something lighter began moving through the office. People started saying thank you more often. Not in forced performative ways, but sincerely. I heard it during morning huddles, saw it in quick notes left on desks, felt it in the way the coworkers held eye contact a little longer during conversations. Alicia from marketing began bringing coffee for her team on Fridays. Daniel from operations started writing handwritten notes when someone helped him meet a tight deadline. Even our department head began opening meetings with a brief moment of appreciation, acknowledging small wins, recognizing effort that would have gone unseen a month earlier. It was subtle, but it felt different, real, like something had cracked open and let a little more light in. No one mentioned the journal, not directly, but the ripple it created was undeniable. What started as my own quiet attempt to hold on to the good had become something shared. Not because I asked for it, not because anyone was told to do it, but because people wanted to. They had seen what it looked like to notice the good, and once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. I watched it all happen with a strange mix of joy and disbelief. I had been so focused on surviving that I hadn't imagined I could influence anything beyond my own peace of mind. And yet, here it was. Gratitude passed hand to hand like something sacred. I felt the air in the office change, softer, kinder. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't just feel tolerated. I felt seen, connected, like maybe we were all learning how to be better to each other, one quiet thank you at a time. Madison came back the next morning like nothing had happened. She greeted people in the hallway with a smile that didn't quite land and said thank you in meetings with a tone that felt too rehearsed. At first, some tried to meet her halfway. They nodded, responded politely, and gave her the benefit of the doubt. But something had shifted too deeply. The warmth spreading through our office didn't leave room for manipulation anymore. And kindness, when forced, is easy to spot. She began mimicking the gratitude others shared, dropping compliments that sounded memorized, leaving notes that focused more on her own contributions than on recognizing others. It was like watching someone wear a costume that didn't quite fit. The harder she tried to participate, the more the difference showed. Not because people were punishing her, but her efforts lacked what made everyone else's real intent. The change around her was organic. She felt calculated. As the weeks went by, the distance grew. Conversations ended when she walked into the room. Requests for collaboration found other paths. Her presence wasn't openly rejected. It was simply left out. Not as revenge, not as retaliation, but as a natural response to someone who no longer fit the rhythm of the room. And eventually, the message reached management, not through complaints, but through patterns. Silence where there used to be engagement. Avoidance where there used to be inclusion. A few days later, she was quietly reassigned to a different department, one with less teamwork, more solitary tasks, a place where precision mattered more than presence. It wasn't a demotion, just a shift. A soft redirection. And while part of me felt a flicker of satisfaction, it was quickly replaced by something more complicated. I didn't hate Madison. I pitied her. She had spent so much time trying to prove she was better, she forgot how to be part of something good. The mirror we held up didn't destroy her. It simply showed her what the rest of us had already learned. That in a place built on appreciation, the absence of it is louder than anything you can say. After everything had settled, I couldn't stop thinking about the journal. It had never been meant for public eyes. It was personal, something I used to stay grounded, not a tool I created to influence others. But now people were aware of it. They were curious. Some were supportive, others cautious. And I could feel the tension that lingered, quiet, unspoken questions hanging in the air. Was I documenting them? Did they need to be careful around me now? Was my gratitude somehow a threat? I didn't want to leave space for doubt. So I wrote an email, short, honest, direct. I addressed it to the entire department. I explained what the journal was, why I started it, and what it meant to me. I made it clear that I had never used it for anything but personal reflection. I added that if anyone felt uncomfortable being mentioned in it, I would respect that without question. There was no agenda, just transparency. I hit send and waited. The first reply came within minutes. Alicia wrote that she hadn't realized I was doing something so thoughtful and that it made her day to know her kindness had meant something. Then Daniel responded saying he loved the idea and wanted to start his own version. My inbox kept filling, one after another. Most of them said the same thing, that they were grateful to be seen, that they were touched someone noticed their small efforts. A few asked if I'd be willing to share how I kept the habit going. 38 replies in total. 37 of them were supportive. One person didn't respond. I didn't need to guess who. But by then, it didn't matter. What I had feared might isolate me had done the opposite. It had connected us. People started talking more openly about the good they saw around them. I noticed sticky notes with thank yous appearing on desks. I heard quiet compliments exchanged in hallways. It wasn't performative. It was sincere. Like my small act had given others permission to appreciate each other out loud. Something shifted in me too. For a long time, I had felt like I was just surviving the day-to-day. Like showing up and doing my work was enough. But now, I felt like I was part of something warmer, stronger. And not because I led a campaign or organized a movement, but because I told the truth. I showed my work, and in doing so gave people a reason to show theirs. It reminded me that the things we keep to ourselves, the quiet ways we cope, the private practices that carry us, can sometimes become the most powerful bridges between us and others. All it takes is a little honesty, and the courage to trust that people will meet it with understanding. In my case, they did. And I will never forget how that felt. To be seen not just for what I produced, but for how I paid attention, and to know that noticing someone's light could make the whole room brighter. Looking back, I'm still surprised by how it all unfolded. I never raised my voice. I never filed a complaint. I didn't build a case or try to outmaneuver Madison. I just stayed where I was. Quiet. Watching. Writing. There were moments I doubted that was enough. Moment I wondered if kindness would only make me easier to push aside. But now I know the truth. Not fighting back doesn't mean surrender. Sometimes it means refusing to become what hurt you. My gratitude journal was never meant to be a defense. It wasn't a strategy or a weapon. It was a lifeline, a way to stay grounded in the small good things when the weight of tension felt too much. And somehow, that quiet practice, just noticing, just writing, became the most honest thing I could offer. It spoke louder than any rebuttal. It revealed more than any argument. And in the end, it stood stronger than anything Madison tried to construct. She came after me with suspicion, with scrutiny, with shadow. But the one thing she'd never expected was light. And light doesn't fight darkness. It just exists. It exposes. It fills. And when there's enough of it, there's no place for shadows to hide. That's what happened, not because I made her fall, but because the environment changed, the people changed, I changed, and what was once tolerated became impossible to ignore. I still keep the journal. It's no longer just a personal tool. It's a reminder that the way we show up, the way we notice, the way we carry each other's names with care, it all matters. That now we move through hard moments defines us more than how loudly we respond. and that some behaviors, no matter how persistent, can't survive in an environment that values truth, gratitude, and quiet strength. This wasn't a story about revenge. It wasn't about proving someone wrong. It was about staying true when it would have been easier not to, and learning that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply keep being kind in a place that tried to convince us not to be. Because when the light is real, it doesn't need to win. It only needs to shine.